Thank you all for coming to our talk tonight, which is called Structured Luck, How U.S. Immigration Policy Affects Immigrants and from Africa. My name is John O'Brien. I'm Associate Professor of Social Research and Public Policy here at NYUAD Abu Dhabi. And I'm delighted to be in conversation with Onoso Imoagene, who I will introduce now. Onoso is an Associate Professor of Social Research and Public Policy at NYUAD Abu Dhabi. She graduated with a first-class honors in sociology from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. She obtained a master's degree in modern society and global transformations from Cambridge in England and a PhD in sociology from Harvard. Her main research areas are international migration and race and ethnicity, with a special focus on first and second generation African immigrants in several national diasporas, including the British and American diasporas. Her first book, Beyond Expectations, which I also highly recommend, Second Generation Nigerians in the United States and Britain, was published by the University of California Press and was the first book-length comparative study on the adult African second generation in Britain and the US. Her second book, which we'll be discussing tonight, Structured Luck, Downstream Effects of the U.S. Diversity Visa Program, is on the intended and unintended consequences of the U.S. Diversity Visa Program on West African immigrants, published by Russell Sage Foundation in 2024. So it is hot off the presses. She's since then started two new projects, a survey on second-generation Africans in the U.S., and what she's calling the Africa-China Migration Project, which sounds fascinating, a qualitative study of African women entrepreneurs in China and Chinese migrants in several African countries. So please join me in welcoming Onoso Imoagene. So we have structured this as kind of a conversation about the book, which I really enjoyed. And so I have some questions prepared for Onoso, and then we'll have some questions from the audience after we discuss for a bit. I really love this book. It's an exceptional book on migration because it uses years of field work and research to examine one specific policy, which I knew very little about before reading the book, but the book really convinced me of how important it is that we understand this, and that the way Onoso understands the policy is important. And the way she does this is to understand it as a process with different phases and stages, starting from before the migration to after the migration. And also the fact that policies are both impacted by and impact human actors who are involved in the process. So she really spelled this out in the book well. And so just to get us started and kind of grounded in what we're talking about here, I wanted to see if Onoso could explain to us what is the Diversity Immigrant Visa Program in the US, briefly how it works, and why you think it's important for us to understand it.
Okay, thank you, John. I want to start by saying thank you so much for all of you being here. It's great to have this occasion to talk about the book. And I just told John that looking at, this first question, I had to go back and read the entire book because he gave me an assignment to be able to touch upon so many of the arguments that are made in the book. So starting from his question, what is the Diversity Visa Program in the United States? I think it's always good to give some background. So at the very basic, the Diversity Visa Immigrant Program has been called the global game of chance. It was created in 1990 by US Congress. It went fully operational in 1995. And the reason or the objective of the program was to diversify the US immigrant streams. It was as a result of some serious lobbying by a group of undocumented Irish immigrants who formed the Irish Immigrant Reformation Movement because they were trying to get the United States to set aside and create some visas that would give legal status to undocumented immigrants in the United States that had come after the deadline for the 1986 Amnesty ECA law that was passed by Reagan. And so they basically made the claim and really advocated and lobbied US congressmen, senators, and congressmen saying, look, you know us as Irish immigrants. We're a true and tested group that has assimilated well into US society. Now with the passage of the 1965 immigration law that liberalized US immigration, we are locked out. We are locked out of the system because most of the immigrants coming into the United States in the 90s and the 80s were predominantly from Latin America and Asia. And so they said, look, give us a law. And they were successful in persuading top politicians in the US to pass this law. And so what the Diversity Visa Program does is that every single year it awards 50,000 immigrant visas to people to citizens of what the United States regards as underrepresented countries, citizens coming from underrepresented countries. And the US calculates that by every year it looks back 5 years. And it looks at countries. And if a country has sent more than 50,000 citizens, if more than 50,000 citizens of a country in the previous 5 years have received an immigrant visa, which is the right to be a permanent resident in the United States, you're no longer regarded as underrepresented to the United States. So right now, as at this recent cycle, about 162 countries around the world, their citizens are eligible to play the Diversity Visa Lottery Program. And so it starts by you apply, you register for the visa lottery, and then on average about 10 to 20 million valid entries are received by the United States from around the world, and then it will choose about 100,000 to 150,000 individuals are chosen from the lottery. So once the US receives those 20 million valid entries, I do not know how they do it now, but they run a lottery somehow and they just pick out names. And then they post, it's now online. When it started in the 90s, it was paper-based. So individuals would just take a form. They could just take a white sheet of paper, write their name, their education, put their picture, their address, and send it off to a consular office in Kentucky. But in 2003, the United States moved the process online because they wanted to tighten security to be able to ensure that it was only one person per application, one person, one application, and for security reasons. So let me use this year as an example. This year, the registration period opened between October and November of 2024 for the DV 2026 visa program. And so you register for the program October to November. The results of the 100,000 or 150,000 people who are selected in the lottery is published in May. May 7 next year, you will go to a dedicated web page and you will look and figure out if your name is there. And then from October 1 of 2025 to September 30 of 2026, individuals now have the right to apply for the immigrant visa. So the thing to understand is that registering for the US visa lottery, that's how it's commonly known. If you're selected in the lottery, it gives you the right to apply. It doesn't give you the immigrant visa. And so you start this whole lengthy process where you have to prove that you're eligible, because the visa lottery program or the US Diversity Visa Program has an educational requirement. It doesn't just take anybody. So you have to be over the age of 18 if you're the primary applicant, and you have to have at least a high school diploma or the equivalent, or you have to have a skill that requires a 2-year apprenticeship program. And then if you meet those requirements, you will then have to do a health screening. You have to submit a police report to reassure them that you don't have a criminal record, or you can explain why you have a criminal record. If you're married, you have to submit your marriage certificate. You pay a fee. You go for an interview. If you're successful, you get the visa, and then you have the right to migrate to the US. So that's really what the DV program is in a nutshell, and we can go into a bit some more detail. Officially, registration for the DV program is free. You do not have to pay money. If you go to the US State Department website, you can figure out where to go and register. But I think in the course of this conversation, we're going to talk about how it has been monetized along the way. I think I want to say something that the program is to be commended because it stands out in this era of immigration restriction from the global south to advanced countries in the global north, where countries are looking to reduce migration. We even know what happened in the current US election and how immigration was a salient topic that drove a lot of intense feelings. So that this program exists, where it's basically saying, we're allowing people who might never have any other way to come to the United States. You're an independent immigrant. That means you do not have family who can sponsor you to come to the US. You're not in an occupation, maybe a medical doctor or something, or IT, where you have an employer sponsor you to come to the US. It allows all those individuals to be able to come into the United States. So I think that's just to give us a background of what the DV program is. I think, did you ask me about why I focused on?
I did, but you could wait for that, or you could go into it.
Okay, I think just briefly, why I focused on diversity immigrants from Nigeria and Ghana, the reason being is that, one, Nigeria and Ghana, before Nigeria became ineligible, because now, according to the United States, Nigerians are no longer underrepresented in the US. But before we became ineligible in 2013, Nigerians and Ghanaians comprised 28% of the 7.9 million valid entries that were submitted for the DV program. Just 2 countries out of 160-something that were eligible. And that's just to show you how the DV program is a huge event in certain countries around the world. It's like there's a fever. You hear about it in school, you hear about it in church, you hear about it at work, you have the street tents, you have the radio jingles. It's just news around the world. You get social media, WhatsApp, Facebook posts. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose Nigeria and Ghana, because the DV now is the main driver, or it's a key driver of African migration to the United States.
Great, and that's actually a perfect segue, because as I said, this book really takes a policy, which we could think of as kind of a dry set of legal things, and really brings us down to earth. And so I want to take us to Ghana and Nigeria, where you talked about these different phases. And so there's one, are you going to play?
Yes.
Okay, so I want you to talk a little bit about that. You talked to people in these places before they were deciding to play, and even you talk about the importance of the language of playing and winning and lottery. This is not how migration policy is often discussed. So if you can just give us some stories of the social dynamics of people, even before they're definitely playing it, who's involved in that process and how does that tend to go?
Okay. I think as I talked about, I said it's a fever. It's so many people are playing it. And what I found is everybody knows someone, somehow, that has won the DV. It might be a close relative. It might be your sibling that has won it, or it could be an acquaintance. You're like, oh, someone in my workplace won it, or a friend in school. Or it could be a distant connection. You hear somebody tell you a friend of a friend, or someone who was 5 years ahead of you in school won the DV. And I was talking to someone I was talking to a friend of mine who works at the University of Ghana at the Legon campus, and he had a research assistant. He worked in African studies. And the assistant basically told me that, in Ghana, it's basically 6 degrees of separation between lottery winners and Ghanaians. And he was building on, there's a Hollywood movie about 6 degrees of separation, and it's basically building on the idea that theoretically, that's everyone on earth is separated by 6 people. Everyone on earth, let me say what he said, is that the notion that everyone on earth is theoretically separated from everyone else by 6 people. And so that's what he was saying. So he told me how, that day, it was during the registration period. That's when I went to Ghana. I wanted to observe the registration period in 2017, between October and November. And so he told me that day he had gotten a text from a friend of his in Denmark who was like, the DV is on, you have to try and play it, I had, even as I was leaving, going to Ghana, I had gotten texts from my own church community, from my pastor actually, sending to the whole WhatsApp group saying, the DV is on, you guys want to think about playing it. And that was directed to Ghanaians because Nigerians could no longer play it anyway, and the church is predominantly Ghanaian. So you just have, their radio jingles, by people who are making it a business. In Burkina Faso, in Togo, there are these individuals who are constantly paying money. If you go into any internet cafe, because these are ubiquitous all over, everywhere in a lot of these African countries, they have one staff person, at least one dedicated staff member, who is just there. And so you walk in and say, I want to play the DV, and they're like, hey, go meet that guy, and then the person will take your picture and fill out your form. You know, so so that's one of the things that now, with the advent of mobile phones, with the advent of smartphones, you can send information about the DV to individuals. So that's really how people get to hear about it. Now, why do people play? I now said, okay, let me talk to people. Why do you play it? And the stories, I think, have to be understood in the context of life in these home countries, right? What's the economic condition? What's the political fortunes in many of these sending countries? And so for individuals, some of them play it because they feel life will be better in the US. The image of the United States is overwhelmingly positive. I actually went and I looked at the Pew survey, and 69% of Africans or 69% of Nigerians have a very positive image of America. And it's similarly high in Ghana and in all the other West African countries they surveyed. The views of America are ranging from positive views from 50-something% into the 70s. And you know, you talk to individuals and they're like, life is great in the United States. One respondent told me US is heaven, that I thought the United States was heaven. You know, you have some people telling you, oh, I really felt that you could pick money off the streets. You know, it was that brilliant. And so, you know, and so they're comparing life in the US to what it is back in their home countries. Some of them think you have individuals who have graduated who can get jobs. You have college graduates who decided they will hustle with a side business. And then the government passes a policy and their business crashes. For example, I had a respondent, Moses. He never wanted to travel or migrate to the United States. It wasn't something he was thinking about. He graduated, and then he started a wholesale business, selling toiletries. And he was making about $5,000 US in profits every year, which was good enough money for him. And so he used to say he had a lot of friends who would come, and he'd just be looking at them and say, no, America is not for me. And then in the 2000s, the Nigerian government changed the importation policy where you could no longer import goods, and it destroyed his business. So he decided, well, okay, I have to change my mind. I had another individual who certain critical events in their lives made them think, it's time for me to leave this country. And this is really dramatic, but I had a friend, a respondent, Benga, who he was in IT, he was doing very well, and then he told me how his wife was pregnant, he didn't like the health care she got in Nigeria, and then the day she was to deliver, they had no electricity. The hospital didn't have electrical power from the government, and their generator wasn't working. And so they had to deliver his wife in the delivery room using candles, and he was like, that's it, no more. I'm coming. He called it a turning point in his life. The other thing I would say is that there are some people who played without really thinking much about it, and this is where the language of play comes in. Because the DV, one of the ways the DV, or what they call the visa lottery, the US visa lottery is sold, is that it's a lottery. It's like, what do you have to lose? Let's make our luck. That's sort of the kind of way they think about it. So I had some respondents who were working in college. They were just going about their daily lives, and someone hailed them and said, come play the DV. This was a visa agent or a visa entrepreneur, and the guy was like, you know, okay. He walked up to the table, and they were like, take the form. We'll take your picture, and it's free. And he was like, well, if it is free, why not? What's that going? There's no harm in doing something that is free. So he applied, and he forgot about it and kept on moving. I had another respondent who was taking an exam. She was actually in an exam writing her WIEC exams, which is like the O-levels, one of the entrance exams into university. And people just walked into the hall and said, you know, started distributing forms. And they were like, what are these forms? And like, oh, visa lottery, visa lottery. I said, just write your name, give us a picture. And she was like, it's exam period. Everybody has a picture in their in their purse. Everybody has a passport picture, so they handed over the passport pictures and said, okay, and she moved on. 2 years later, they started looking for her. The visa agent started calling all around saying, you won. And she was like, her mother was like, what did you play? And she was like, I can't really remember what I played. You know, so you had some people who actually didn't have a fully fledged or fully formed desire to migrate, but it was convenient. They were persuaded to do it, and then they were one of the lucky few. And they started the process, and they are here now in the United States. Yeah.
So yeah, you talk about luck, and of course the title of the book is Structured Luck. And what that really means in the way that Onoso discusses it is all along the way, there are people who are involved in kind of pushing things one way or another in the process. And one of the most fascinating group of characters to me in the book are what you call visa entrepreneurs, who are basically people involved in the home country at kind of pushing people to maybe play and get involved and also monetizing it for themselves. So can you tell us who they are and kind of what role they play?
All right. That I found fascinating. I didn't intend to go, I didn't start there at all. What happened was I was interviewing the diversity immigrants, those who had won it and had come to the United States, and I was talking to them that, you know, talk to me about the DV. How did you hear about it? How did you play it? Let me hear your story. And then a number of them kept on talking about these visa agents, these individuals that helped them play the DV, and it was really strange to me. I was like, it's free. You could have gone to the website yourself. Why? What happened? And so as I kept on hearing those stories, I now decided that I actually wanted to go. I needed to go to Ghana during the registration period to try to find these visa agents myself and talk to them. And so I think I want to just share some pictures. When you ask me who are these visa entrepreneurs, I would say they are a bridge. They serve as a bridge between the program and millions of people in these immigrant sending countries or in these countries where people are playing the DV. And what they are doing on one hand is that they are facilitating migration. They are bringing the news of the US visa lottery to thousands of people that will never have heard about it, and they're helping them play. They're making them or assisting them to play it. And so I think this is, when I went to Ghana, I realized I found different types of them. I found these individuals or visa agents that are travel agencies. So they have their travel agency business where they are buying airplane tickets for people and what have you. And then they have this side arm where they're helping people apply for the visa lottery. And so you had these individuals that set up tents all around Accra, many times in some transportation hubs around where there's high traffic, the high pedestrian traffic. And this one had electricity, it had internet connection, so people just go in there, you're on your way to work, you're coming back from work or whatever you're doing, and you're like, hey, oh, the visa lottery, let me go play. And so they used to charge basically 10 to 15 cedis, which is at that time was the equivalent of $3 to $4 US. So the price of getting a light afternoon meal or a loaf of bread and breakfast. So this was one. So this is just to show you it was a huge transportation hub, intercity, and also moving people out of Ghana into other countries. This was one by the Accra Mall, so that's the Accra Mall there. I also found it very fascinating that many times the tents were next to lottery, to where people could play, what do they call those lottery or cash lottery or play, put a bet on games or something. I was like, well, maybe it reads together. This was one, a very small one, right next to the medical campus of the University of Ghana in Kolebu. Very tiny, no electricity. People would take their picture and fill a form, and then the forms were moved to the central office where they were now registered for. People were registered for the program. They had a backlog, so I stayed there and I watched many people come and say, "Hey, I want to get my confirmation number," and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're sorry, we haven't yet submitted it, and I'll come back tomorrow." And I spoke to the staff, and it was like, "They're so behind, they won't get it till like next week or something." So I found this interesting one where it says live, work, and study legally in the US. You can see some were beautiful, some were really wretched. But I like this, and the reason why I put this up is that you can see the transnational migration of what it means to be undocumented and not documented and documented in the US. People understand the power of papers. And so these were
And I think just important to mention, which we might mention, this is for, you're legal if you get this lottery. So this lottery is, you're a legal immigrant.
Yes, what it gets you, if you win, you have to then start the application process. And if you're successful, then you have permanent residence. And then in the US, from permanent residence, you can become a citizen if you want to, after 5 years. So this was really what the visa entrepreneurs were doing. So their job was to as I said, assist people. And one of the reasons why I want to show this. One of the reasons why I'm going to forward. One of the reasons why they have become very popular in all these sending countries is that the US policy itself has created the market for them to exist. And one way they have done that is with the visa requirement of the passport, what the passport has to be to successfully register for the program. So if you look at it, it tells the visa entrance, the program entrance, that you have to have your file, your passport picture has to be in JPEG format. It has to be equal to or less than 240 kilobytes. It has to be in a square aspect ratio. And it has to be 600 by 600 pixels in dimension. And the question I got all the time from people is, what does this mean? This doesn't make sense to us. And if you think about all of us, many of us here have smartphones. Have you ever taken a picture with your smartphone before? And then you look at your file size. It runs in the megabytes, 1.6 megabytes, 2 megabytes, and now they're telling them the picture has to be 240 kilobytes. And individuals like, how do I resize it? What's that process like? What is 600 by 600 pixels? So they were like, yeah, we will just turn to these visa entrepreneurs who have the expertise, who know how to do this. And so in this way, you can see the way in which the US immigration policy, on just the picture alone, keeps these individuals in business. And so I spoke to one of the owners of those visa entrepreneurial, one of these, of the travel agencies, and I asked him, it's free. Why should people pay you to register, help them register for the DV? And this is what he told me. He said, many people don't know how to use a laptop. People don't have email addresses. How do we assume that high school level diploma holders know anything about the computer? So we provide them with the internet, the computer, label, everything, and we charge them only 10 cedis. The way we take their pictures, we do it professionally. It goes through the online submission successfully. Talking to some Ghanaians, they told me that the 10 cedis we charge is so cheap, too cheap for helping people register. Then he now went on and said, we don't make mistakes. And so this is what they're selling: expertise, know-how, and that we will ensure that your application goes through. And these claims are accepted as legitimate by the Ghanaians. Everybody, they want to come to the US. They don't want to be disqualified for a stupid mistake. And so they're willing to pay the money, and this is the marriage between the cultural economy, what is motivating these individuals, and the ability to make money off the program.
And then you talk about if you do win, some of these entrepreneurs still hold some involvement in your process potentially. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it really depends on the ethics, the business ethics of the visa agents. I think for some of you who might want to get some more information about some of their practices, the book by Charles Peel called The Fixer, that looks at the marriage, what he calls marriage brokers in Togo, would be a good example of a book to read. And what you have is that there are some visa agents who, if you If you use them to register for the program, they will give you your confirmation number. They'll give you the slip that has your unique identification number that you have applied for the DV, and then you're on your own. You can take that and check in May that you have won, and then you can continue the process. But there are some agents that don't give that to you. They keep that confirmation number. And they do not use your email address. They use their email address when they're applying for you. And so you're stuck. Because the United States has the ability, it allows individuals to say, oh, I forgot my confirmation number. But to get them to send you your confirmation number again, you need to put in your last name and your email address. But if your email address wasn't used, and you don't know the email address that they used, you can't get that confirmation number, and you can't move forward. And so I had some individuals who basically fell victim to that, especially those who were told, what do you have to lose is free. Just, we'll do it for you, you know, we are Samaritans. And then once they won, they were being charged $3,000 US, $6,000 US to release the confirmation number and allow them and use those agencies to put in the whole application through. Yeah.
Okay, so moving through the process here, so we've got people who have won, they've moved forward, and then they arrive to the US. So one thing that really struck me about the book was you're comparing this class of migrants to different migrants who come to the US. And you have a chart that really struck me about how the migrants who arrive through the diversity visa program with legal status fare compared to those who arrive through different, what you call classes of admission to the US. Can you talk about that comparison a bit and how you explain it?
That question made me put together this PowerPoint slide, because I was like, there's no way I can answer that question without at least putting some context to it. And really what happened was, as I started talking to my respondents, the 74 that I interviewed in the United States, I started hearing some stories of what I'll call disruption. And I was like, well, you know, you have the joy of winning the DV. It's a family win, it benefits your family, you're able to file for your family to come to the United States because of the US immigration system that is based on family reunification, or the fact that if you're a citizen or a permanent resident, you can apply to get your spouse to come, you can apply for your parents, you can apply for your siblings. So many individuals, when they win the DV, their families see it as a family win, because it's going to benefit the family in the long run, not just because of remittances of how much money they're going to send home.
Sorry, can you tell them what a family Joseph is? That was my favorite.
Oh, okay. So as part of the project, I spoke to family members of the diversity immigrants in my sample, and I spoke to their friends. I wanted to see how it was an upward tool of mobility, so I told them, nominate 2 individuals who were at your level, who were your peers at the time you won the DV. And then I want to talk to them, and I also want to talk to siblings and parents. And so I spoke to a sister of one of the diversity visa immigrants, and what she told me was that we think of our brother as the family Joseph. And I was like, why? How are you using it? And she was using it in the biblical way. If for those of us who are aware of the story of Joseph, the son of Jacob, who was sold into slavery, and then went to Egypt, and then became, after many years of struggle, he became like the second to the Pharaoh. Let's think of him as the prime minister. And then there was a famine where his family were in Canaan. And because he was prime minister, he was able to, first of all, feed his family in Canaan so they don't die of the famine. And then he was able to move them from Canaan to Egypt and resettle them in a very good land. So that's how she was using it. That we think of our brother as the family Joseph. One, he's going to send us migrant dollars to keep us. He's helping us start businesses. He's taking care of our parents. He has put a borehole in our home. You know, my brother has a trucking business that he has sponsored, and also he's filing for us to come to the US. So that's what it is when they use the term family Joseph. And I must say right now, in Nigeria and many of these African countries, so many families are looking for family Josephs in that sense, where they have one person overseas who is able to help them survive the tough times. So, going back to where, yeah. So I realized that the stories that I was hearing, there were two sides of the winning coin. There were the positive stories. It's great, we're doing well, we're able to secure our families' futures. But there were some negative stories, and I wanted to see if this was a result of just the people in my sample, or if this was a national story, if this was happening largely. And so I used two waves, longitudinal data from the New Immigrant Survey to run some regressions, trying to see how do diversity immigrants perform in the labor market in terms of earnings, compared to immigrants coming out of the three other major admission categories, which are employer-sponsored, asylees and refugees, and family unification. In the United States right now, I don't know what will happen with Trump, but right now, the US grants about 1 million immigrant visas per year. That's really how many legal immigrants are coming to the United States. That's not counting those who are coming in without papers, crossing the US-Mexico border or overstaying their visitors' visas. And so what I found, oops, where am I? Where's my graph? Oh, I'm going far ahead, sorry. Thing isn't, where's that table? There we go. So what I found was, when I ran the regressions, what I found was, when you think about how scholarly research has predicted that legal immigrants will do in the United States in the labor market, the expectation is that immigrants coming in with employer-sponsored visas will do the best. They are educated, they have jobs, they have been in the United States for a while. Many of them are in IT because they're moving from H-1B visas into, which is a very highly skilled migrant visa, into becoming green card holders, which are legal permanent residents. So we expect them to be at the top. Now, because diversity visa immigrants are highly educated, they have this educational requirement, we expect them to do second best. And the family unification, the expectation is that they will be the third in terms of performance in the labor market. And refugees and asylees are predicted and expected to do the least well, or to do the worst of the four groups, because they come in with low levels of human capital, they're living places of displacement. You know, that's the expectation. So I was shocked when I ran the regression models and I found that actually diversity visa immigrants are doing the least well of all four groups at time one, which is a year basically from the time they get the green card. But then what we see is some recovery where they sort of then reach parity, or there's no statistically significant difference by the time of time two, which is about 3 to 5 years later. So it made me, and so what I think I would say here is that it made me realize the importance of social networks when immigrants are integrating into any society. If you think about employer-sponsored, they have support from their employers, their jobs. Family, those who are coming as family-sponsored have their family member who will give them room and board, who would basically use their networks to settle them. Refugees and asylees have government help. The government gives them both financial and non-financial help. And they also have a lot of private NGOs, organizations, volunteers that are always there to help refugees settle. Diversity visa immigrants are the only group that don't have support. Again, the language of play is important here, because the United States, with the language of, oh, it's play, it's a lottery, it devolves, or it removes any responsibility from the part of the government to support beyond giving you the visa. The idea is it's a golden ticket. We've given that to you. If you think about Powerball or jackpot or lotteries, when people win $300 million or even $5 million in a US lottery jackpot, nobody is going back to say, how are you doing with that money? We hear horror stories, but basically it's like, you've won something great, you go ahead and figure it out. And I think that's where it makes us realize that networks are important. And it's a cautionary tale for US immigration policy, because if we are saying the US or any other country, not just the US, needs or wants more skilled immigrants, if we just take more skilled or highly skilled immigrants without thinking of the social support networks they have, it's going to be a problem. Because this graph is showing you how the close proximity in the performance between employer-sponsored and family-sponsored speaks to the power of how social networks affect integration.
And I think and you talk about a few of the challenges that are faced by these specific kind of immigrants, part of it being shaped by the fact that, as you say, they're independent immigrants, right? They're coming on their own. And you talk also about how the disruptions you mentioned, and one of them that seems really striking in the book is this idea of the college disruption. Is that what it's called? Educational disruption?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's one of the most consequential disruptions I found. You can talk about marital disruptions, people being used for papers, then they come to the US, they get a divorce, or families being separated over years. But the one I found to be most consequential were individuals who were in college. They were in college, first year biochemistry, first year medicine, English, communication, or whatever, and they were walking down and people said, hey, come play the DV. And I had 23 of those individuals in my sample. And of the 23, 21 abandoned their degree program to come to the United States. Only 2 remained or were able to stay back and finish their degree program. The reason being is that if you have a green card, which is the legal permanent resident status visa, if you have a green card in the United States, you can't stay outside of the United States longer than 180 days. If not, your green card lapses. So if you're in college and you won it in your first year or your second year, you're most likely going to win it in your third, and you have to leave before you finish, before you graduate. And many of them their parents didn't have the money to buy them the multiple tickets until they finished. And so this is one of the things I found, that all these individuals came to the United States because their parents and people told them, oh, you'll go back to school in the US, don't worry about it. You'll finish in the US. But we know school in the US is expensive. You come to the United States, you stay in a friend's house, and the friend tells you, oh yeah, you can stay with me, and then within a month, 2 months, they're like, we're tired of you. You have to go out and work, pay your bills. In America, you have to pay bills, which is the truth. And so they can't go to school. Or, I had individuals like someone like Brianna. It took her 12 years to get her degree. And she was one who got the degree. Only 9 of the 21 had gotten their degrees, and for many of them, it took them years, and they had loans to pay at the end of the day. And so I'm making a case. One of the things I argue in my book is that a simple tweak, where the United States has a college exemption for those individuals, if you win if you're chosen in the visa lottery, if you're chosen in the lottery and you go through the application process and you're successful and you're given the visa, if they can prove that they're enrolled in a college program, you allow them to defer that visa until they finish. It's a win-win. The individuals finish, you get highly skilled migrants, which you say you want, and they come into the United States and enter the labor market at a higher level than coming into the US and being seen, if they abandon their degree programs, being seen as high school diploma holders. And another reason why I'm asking for that is that there's a psychological trauma that these individuals face. Because to be able to enter a university program in Nigeria and Ghana, it shows that you're excellent. It shows that you're a good student and you're motivated and you're on the path to entering the elite in your country, because the spots are very few. And these countries are the populations are very young, so there are a lot of people fighting for these college spots. And so you have these individuals who had shown they were excellent, they were good, and they come to the US and they're so sad because they look at their mates who have finished, right? So you came, you're working as a home health aide, and you think back to your classmates in college and they have finished. Some of them are now in the US doing master's programs or in England or whatever, and there you are still, you know, still struggling, security officer, janitor, working as, you know, for many of them as home health aides or CNA, certified nursing assistants in the health industry. So I think, you know, that's something we can look at.
Great. So I think we have one more question, and we're going to open it up to the audience for any questions you may have. So I'm going to bring up a man who's on the minds of many of us from the US, Donald Trump, who shows up in your book because he famously commented on the places that people are coming from as S-hole countries. I won't say what he actually said, and wanted to kind of cut down immigration from those countries. He's been elected president, spoiler alert. I wondered what your thoughts were on, and I think, by the way, I should say, one powerful case you make in the book is that this is a program that's working all in all. There are some things that could be better about it, but as a program that is designed to bring people to the US, it's done what it should do. But I wondered if you had any thoughts about what you think this new administration might bring and what you would kind of recommend as changes if you could.
It's an unknowable, because, I mean, only the Biden administration's immigration policy, comprehensive policy that they wrote, which wasn't passed, but they wrote and provided a document. Only his policy called for an increase in the number of visas for the diversity visa program. His policy called for an increase to 80,000 from 50,000 visas. All other comprehensive immigration bills that have been put forward or debated have called for a reduction or actually the cancellation, that they should terminate the program completely. So this program, nobody, I mean, with the Trump administration, if they're able to successfully pass a comprehensive bill, they might do away with it, unless people can really lobby to say what this program really is. That it's a highly skilled immigrant program. Let's just make that clear. Even though it is coming, it's supposedly a visa lottery, it's getting the elite and the cream of the best of many of these countries that are sending immigrants to the global north. Because it's amazing when you think that a program that is supposed to be a lottery, and the understanding of a lottery is that it's random. Everybody should have an equal chance to win in a lottery. But how is it that a program that is based on a lottery is actually bringing in individuals that are more educated than the US average? If you look at the African immigrants playing, or let's start as a whole, 50% of all diversity immigrants coming into the United States since looking in a series of years have at least a high school, have at least a college degree. That's compared to 35% of the US, of the national US average. When you look at Africans, 61.5% of all DV immigrants coming in through the, all immigrants coming through the diversity visa program have at least a college degree. So it's a highly skilled migrant program. And so the case has to be made. I think one of the reasons why people don't like the program, at least on the conservative side, is that they don't like where the people that are coming in through the program now. It was imagined, you know, Trump was like, why don't people come from Norway? Why are people coming from Haiti? You know, and people from Norway don't want to come. They don't need to come, right? There are many reasons why people migrate. But even as about 35 to 40% of all diversity immigrants are coming from Africa, about 30 to 35% are coming from Europe. what the US considers Europe, though my friend recently told me that, oh no, so that's Central Asia. I was like, well, the US classifies these countries as Europe. So you're thinking in terms of all the countries coming out of all of the Soviet Union, the defunct Soviet Union. So Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, think about Belarus. All those are the top sending countries now for the DV, which the US classifies as Europe, but they're not the traditional European from Ireland and Italy and where have you. So I don't know. It's really on uncertain ground. I would say that it should be kept. I think even as people don't like it, it's bringing highly skilled migrants, highly motivated individuals who are doing poor jobs, who are doing low-wage jobs, and they're doing them excellently. Think about it. Isn't it a great thing? Well, it's not a great thing for the immigrants. For on the US side, they don't have any problems with a high school graduate or someone who was in college being a home health aide or working on the manufacturing floor. They are individuals that are going to do the job well. Right, and that's one of the reasons why people are saying we turn a blind eye to the waste, to the brain waste that is going on. I don't know. They don't like immigration right now. The current administration has a particular view of who they want to be Americans, and so we'll see.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing the book with us and your thoughts. We have some time for questions from the audience. So